So we're going to talk a little bit about controlling the media, how that happens, and what kind of things you need to know when we talk about who controls the media and how. First is controlling ownership of the media. One of the things you need to know here is that we have what we call the Federal Communications Commission. The Federal Communications Commission, we call that the FCC. They are a regulatory commission in the executive branch that's main purpose is to monitor what media is doing. So they monitor how much a media conglomerate owns. They're making sure that there's constant competition in media. They wouldn't ever allow one media group to become so large that there wouldn't be competition for others. So they help to control the ownership here, making sure that nobody gets too large or too vast. They hold that individuals should have the opportunity to hear and see many different opinions and views, read more than one newspaper, and access multiple viewpoints. And so that's the main purpose here. Increased media concentration, they're trying to make sure that that all audiences can be reached. So things like they're going to make sure that there are some media outlets that will cover things in a different language, that things are closed captioned for people who can't hear, that there are lots of access points for people to get to media, making sure of that. One of the things here that is starting to emerge is the disappearance of localism or local media. Local news organizations tend to not make much of a profit for a media conglomerate. So things like ABC, the ABC company, when they give some of their airtime to a local station, a lot of times they're going to lose a little bit of a profit on that, simply because there's not as many viewers. It's not prime time. There's not a lot of people who follow local news anymore. And so we're starting to see local news die out. But one of the main purposes of the FCC is to make sure that you have at least some access to some local news, and that it is open to you and open to many different people. In Madison, we have a very rich history of local news, and so you don't really notice it very much, but in larger cities, there is a little less of that, and even smaller towns, there's a lot less of that. So the FCC is really trying to make sure that those things continue to stick around so that you have all of the news that you need. Control of broadcasting. So one of the things that we struggle with a little bit is what should the media cover and what should they not cover? What are they allowed to cover? What is dangerous for the media to cover? And we have two specific examples that the book brings up. First is the Second Gulf War, which happened in the early 1990s. And in this war, there started to become a great deal of controversy about whether the media was accurately reporting what was really happening in the Second Gulf War. And what media was starting to say was, we're reporting what we're told to report. And it becomes into this question of how much should the media report what the government needs it to report, and then how much of it should they dig into themselves and report what they really think is happening. This always becomes an issue when we're in a war. The problem with reporting secret things or non-government published items is that sometimes we can put ourselves into danger. It means that sometimes we're exposing things that put our soldiers in danger, put civilians in danger, things like that. And then the second example is government's attempt to control the media after September 11. This really ties back into that Frontline documentary that we watched a number of months ago. And it's this idea of when people know information, is it a good thing to have them release that information, sort of a whistleblower, if you will, or is it something where we need to keep those secrets in order for people to stay safe? And what we really started to realize is that after September 11, there's this turning point where the American public feels like they need to know some of these things, that had they known, had the CIA sort of picked up on some of the threats that they had been getting before September 11th, maybe they would have prevented it. I mean, you can always, look back and debate whether it could have or could not have happened, but the reality of it is that for the American people, many of them believe that the more information we have, the stronger we are. However, government continues to hold fast to the idea that when they release information, it puts things at risk. That now everybody knows these things. And you or me may be totally okay with knowing those things because we don't have any intention of hurting anybody. But somebody else who may be planning something, now that they have that information, they are more dangerous to us. And so it starts to become this issue of what should the public know and what should the public not know in order to keep them safe. And that's kind of an ongoing debate. I don't think it will ever die away. I think especially with new technologies, new medias, it becomes very difficult. Things like Twitter, when somebody on Twitter says something that's threatening, is that something that we need to be more aware of? Is it something we need to have monitored? Some people will say yes, many people will say no. And so there's this constant back and forth of where is that line in the sand of where we're okay to know things and where we're not. The public's right to media access. So first let's talk a little bit about the stance of the FCC and the courts. Historically, continuously, the courts have been saying that it is the public's right to have good media access. And that means that when media conglomerates go about finding ways to get information, they have to pay the price sometimes. It's hard for media conglomerates because it's costly to get, things out to people. But the FCC and the courts continue to say it is needed, it's necessary, and it is a piece of what you do, and so you've got to pay that price, even if it's not super profitable. And then the second piece is this idea of new technologies. We are now in a world where news happens at a real-time rate. Things like when you see crisis happen, lots of times it's in real time. We're watching what's really happening live. And that can change a little bit about where media access is okay. The FCC's job is to sort of regulate what happens on media. And so one of the things that they access is, are things appropriate for everyone to be viewing? And that's always a question of, is this something that is, again, safety, or is it basically just, reporting things? One of the things in current events that has been talked about a little bit in the FCC is the San Bernardino shooting. There's a live video feed of the police taking down the SUV that had the two shooters in it. Is that something that should be on your television in your living room? Is that something that needs to be monitored a little bit more? If you have small children and they turn on the TV and that's what they see, is that your right to media access, or is that going a step too far? So this new technology. We also know that, I think your book talks about this, I think it's a good example. When John F. Kennedy was assassinated, we have two very primitive cameras that had been covering the parade at the time. So we have a few shots of the assassination in the convertible and Jackie Kennedy reaching back and trying to get a Secret Service agent up to her and all of that. Had that happened today, we would have hundreds and hundreds of videos, cell phone videos. Everyone would be taking video of the parade probably. We would have all sorts of information and technology available. That's a good thing, but it's also a challenge. It means that it's hard to regulate what the media covers. It makes me think back to like the Paris attacks. As the Paris attacks are going on, during the breaking news coverage, you've got already cell phone video of people in the concert hall. You've got testimony, people calling in and talking about what it was like in real time. And that's good because it allows us to get more information, but it's also a little harder because it can't be regulated as much. It's hard to sort of regulate what someone will say on live feed. And sometimes it's, again, part of the government saying, hey, when you release these things, when you show all this cell phone video before we've even gotten to investigate it, that puts us at some sort of a risk here. We can't control what's, getting out there, and so that makes things a little bit more dangerous in regards to keeping people safe. And then the last thing that your book talks a little bit about is bias in the media. We know that there's bias in the media. We know that it happens. We've talked about narrowcasting. We've talked about this perpetuation of these biased or partisan talk shows and websites and all sorts of things. And so the real question is, when you see media and you see a bias, is it reality or is it perception? Do you perceive that the media is being biased, or is the media actually being biased? The tough thing here is that we don't know. There's no real good gauge to get a sense of if it's actually biased or if it's perceived as a bias. And so that can be a kind of a sticking point here. So one of the things that we know in political science is that reality or perception is always going to be up for debate. But what we need to do is teach people like you, younger generations, how to analyze media in a critical way and really get to the root of it for yourself. In a general public opinion sense, it may be one way or the other, but for you, you have to take a look at, even though I don't agree with what maybe the media is saying, are they being biased, or are they just presenting something that I don't agree with, and that's the reality of the situation? So there's that question. In the last 10, 15 years, there's been a lot of questions about racial bias, racial profiling. What kind of racial ethnicities do you see when you turn on the television or when you read a story? Are we covering things from different minority groups? Are we making sure that the issues of those minority groups are held just as high as the issues of the majority, Caucasian, white, middle-class person? This comes down to even what a news coverage looks like. How many of the reporters are of a different race? How many of the stories are covering things around the country as opposed to just in, small little sections of the country? And then the third piece is a commercial bias. And this really comes out of profit. Is what the media is covering things that they need to make a profit? Are they covering things in favor of a specific company or organization in order to make some money? Or are they sort of doing it because it needs to happen? It's something that you'll probably never know, and that's the challenge of it, that there are things that you as a viewer just won't be aware of. But it is something to look critically at and to sort of understand where are things coming from and why would they be featuring a specific story for a specific reason. Okay, you're finished with notes for this chapter.